Welcome to the deep dive, everybody. You ready for this? Today we're going to do a deep dive on Belle Gunness.
Ooh, Belle Gunness. This should be good.
So she was suspected of being a serial killer in the late 1800s and early 1900s.
Wow.
We're using her Wikipedia page, mostly.
Oh,
It pulls from a lot of different sources, so
yeah,
buckle up. It's going to be a wild ride.
definitely.
Okay, so what's really fascinating about Belle Gunness is think about the time she was operating in. We're talking the American Midwest, right?
Yeah.
Late 1800s, early 1900s.
Mm-hmm.
A woman running a farm, that wouldn't have raised too many eyebrows back then.
No, not at all. Although maybe it should have with her.
Right. That's what we're going to find out, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So let's start with her background. She was born Brynhild Paulsdatter Sturseth.
Okay.
Try saying that 5 times fast.
No, thank you.
In Norway in 1859.
Right.
Pretty normal beginning, right?
Yeah. For someone later known as Hell's Belle,
That's a big difference.
huge contrast.
Why do you think people are still so fascinated by her story?
It's that contrast, I think. You know, she wasn't some, I don't know, criminal mastermind from birth, right?
Yeah.
It's that transformation that I think really gets people, even over a century later.
It makes you wonder if there was something about coming to America and that whole transition and everything that maybe pushed her down this path.
Right? Yeah, maybe the pressure of a new life.
So in 1881,
Mm-hmm.
she emigrates to the U.S.,
Mm-hmm.
changes her name to Belle, much easier to say,
Sure.
and settles in Chicago.
Classic immigrant story.
Yeah.
Well, with a very dark twist.
So she marries her first husband, Mads Sorensen.
Okay.
They open a candy store together.
Okay.
And then things start to get a little suspicious. So their store burns down,
Oh.
and then their home burns down.
Mm.
And both times,
Up.
it results in insurance payouts.
Okay, now, fires were more common back then, but
Sure.
2 fires and then the insurance. You gotta admit, that's a little suspicious.
It really does.
And honestly, that was kind of a common scam.
Really?
Oh, yeah. People played on the fact that back then they didn't have the investigative tools that we have today.
It makes you wonder if she was kind of like in on that from the beginning. Like, just taking advantage.
Yeah, it's possible.
Then they have a few kids. 2 of their babies die from inflammation of the large intestine.
What is that?
Now, this is where it gets interesting,
Okay.
because that could be a sign of poisoning.
Oh, wow.
And the sources actually mentioned that the neighbors were gossiping, saying that they never even saw her pregnant.
Oh, really?
So, I don't know. What do you think?
Well, we can't say for sure, but the timing is definitely suspicious.
Yeah, I know.
And you add in the rumors, it's very suspicious.
And then her husband, Mads Sorensen, dies.
Oh, no.
Cerebral hemorrhage, they said.
Mm.
Basically a bleed in the brain.
Mm-hmm.
She claimed he came home from work with a headache, took some quinine powder, for the headache,
Right.
and later she found him dead. But here's where it gets even more suspicious.
Okay.
So, turns out, Mads had 2 life insurance policies.
Okay.
One that was about to expire, and one that had just started. And both of them were active on the day he died.
Oh, come on. That's a little too convenient.
The payout was $5,000.
Wow.
Enough for her to move to Indiana and buy herself a pig farm.
A pig farm.
Yeah, and that farm is going to play a pretty big role in this whole story.
Okay, so this is where it takes a turn then.
This is where it gets dark. But before we get to that, she marries husband number 2, Peter Gunness.
Okay.
And, you guessed it, another suspicious death. Peter's infant daughter dies while in Belle's care.
Oh, my God.
They never determined a cause of death for the baby.
But, I mean, how is this happening?
I know, it's just too weird.
It's too many coincidences. Yeah, I don't buy it.
So just 8 months later, Peter Gunness dies.
No.
Now, get this. Belle claimed a meat grinder fell on him
A meat grinder.
while he was reaching for something on a high shelf, and it crushed his skull.
I don't know about that one.
I don't know about that one either. Sounds a little far-fetched, right?
Yeah, a little bit.
The coroner at the time, he was suspicious.
Of course.
But back then, they didn't have, the technology we have today.
Yeah,
So there really wasn't much he could do.
I see.
And wouldn't you know it, Belle collects another insurance payout. $3,000 this time.
Okay, so it's starting to feel less like bad luck and more like a pattern.
Right.
Like husbands and children dying, and then she's benefiting financially every time. That's chilling.
So instead of looking for a new husband locally, Belle decides to place these marriage ads in newspapers.
Marriage.
Yeah, specifically targeting men in Chicago.
Oh, wow. Okay, so that's a change. She's not just waiting around anymore. She's going after people.
She's actively seeking them out.
I mean, that's really unsettling. She's like planning this.
So think about the men who'd be responding to these ads back then.
Yeah, you're right. They were probably lonely, maybe desperate, looking for someone.
Vulnerable.
Exactly.
And according to the sources, at least 2 of those men who answered her ads, Henry Gerholt and John Moe, they vanished, went to visit Belle, and were never seen again.
Just gone. Just gone. This really makes you realize how isolated things were back then, right?
Right.
No cell phones, no internet. It was easy for people to just disappear.
The perfect scenario for someone like Belle.
Yeah.
And she did not waste the opportunity.
Yeah.
But things couldn't go on forever.
No.
In 1908, her farmhouse in Indiana burns down.
No.
Tragic, right? Grieving mother and her 3 children perishing in the fire.
Yeah, a terrible accident. At least that's what it seemed like at first.
At first, this fire, it was just the beginning of the most horrific chapter in Belle Gunness' story.
Oh, boy. Okay. I am on the edge of my seat.
We'll have to wait for part 2 to find out what happens.
I can't wait.
Thanks for joining us for part 1 of the Deep Dive.
See you next time.
We'll see you in part 2. Okay, so we left off with this fire. Destroys the farmhouse.
Right.
And investigators are, sifting through the ashes, trying to figure out what happened. What do they find? A headless adult female body.
Oh, my gosh.
He assumed it was Belle, and then the remains of her 3 children.
Oh, how awful. So a tragic accident then, case closed.
Well, that's what everyone thought at first. But remember those, soft depressions in the ground around the farm that the source material mentions?
Yeah, I remember that. What was that all about?
Those weren't so innocent. Turns out those were actually shallow graves.
Oh, no.
Investigators start digging. They find body parts, hands, feet, torsos, all wrapped in burlap sacks. Just awful.
Oh, that's horrible.
Like something out of a nightmare.
So it wasn't just the family in the house fire.
No. So how did they figure this out?
Well, remember Alal Gellion,
Yeah.
whose brother, Andrew, had been corresponding with Belle.
Right. He was one of the men who answered her marriage ad. And Isla had those letters from Belle, remember? The ones urging Andrew to move to LaPorte and bring all his money.
Yeah, and to keep it a secret, too, right?
Yes. A huge red flag. So he goes to the farm with a former hired hand, and they start looking at those depressions.
Oh.
And guess what they find? A gunny sack with body parts that Allo recognizes as his brother's.
Oh, my God. I can't even imagine finding out your brother was murdered like that.
Horrible, right? Just the thought that this seemingly normal woman could do something so horrific.
It really makes you wonder if you can ever really know anyone.
So they keep digging. They find more bodies, at least 11 more victims.
Wow, 11.
And they're all dismembered, in the exact same way.
The same way.
The sources describe it. Decapitated, arms removed at the shoulders, legs severed at the knees.
This was more than just murder, wasn't it? It sounds so brutal.
So methodical. I mean, what would drive someone to do something like that?
Yeah, was it just greed, or was there something else, something more?
It's a question that still bothers people today. What do you think about Ray Lamphere, her hired hand? Remember, he was also reportedly her lover.
Yeah, so was he in on this? Was he helping her?
Well, Lamphere, he was convicted of arson for the fire.
Okay.
But his confession, it's pretty interesting. He said that Belle was the one who was luring the men in with the ads, killing them and robbing them.
And he just helped.
He even said that she asked him to burn down the house with her children inside.
That's crazy. And why would he do that? What kind of person does that?
Was he manipulated by Belle?
Maybe. I don't know. Could it have been he loved her?
Possibly.
Yeah.
But then there's the question, what happened to Belle?
Right.
Remember, Lamphere claimed the body they found in the fire wasn't actually her? He thought she staged her own death and escaped.
So she could still be out there.
That's the big mystery of this whole case.
Yeah.
Did she really pull it off and just disappear? The sources mentioned some reported sightings of her after the fire, but nothing concrete.
So we just don't know.
DNA testing on the body in the fire was inconclusive. We just don't know.
So what really happened to Belle Gunness? Did she escape and live out her life somewhere else?
We're left with so many unanswered questions.
Yeah.
The evidence of the crimes is there, right? And the people who knew her, their accounts are chilling. But we don't know the end of her story.
So she's like a ghost story almost.
Yeah, it's like she just stepped out of history and into legend.
That's what makes this case so interesting, I think. You want to know, you know. what really happened. You try to put the pieces together. Who was she, really?
Okay, so we had this woman, Belle Gunness, ordinary immigrant, becomes one of the, if not the most prolific and gruesome suspected serial killer in American history.
Yeah.
But what does this all mean? Why are we still talking about her over 100 years later?
I think it's a lot of things. The brutality, obviously.
Yeah.
And that we don't know what happened to her, but also she was a woman.
Right.
And back then, women were seen as harmless,
Oh,
domestic.
she really turned that whole image on its head.
Yeah, it's unsettling for sure. But also, like you said, fascinating.
It makes you think about gender roles and who we see as being capable of violence. I mean, evil can look like anything, right?
Exactly, even a regular farm woman.
And her story has those themes that just never get old. Greed, deceit.
The dark side of human nature, it's something we all relate to.
She was so good at manipulating people. She knew how to play on their weaknesses, their loneliness, their desires.
And she was able to hide in plain sight for so long.
Because she understood how society worked, how to act, how to gain trust, how to take advantage of the system.
It makes you think, if she were alive today, what would she be doing?
Right.
The internet, social media, it would be a whole different world for her.
Imagine her on a dating app.
Oh, wow. Scary to think about. She could create all these different identities, target whoever she wanted, and then disappear without a trace.
It'd be a lot easier for her today than back then, for sure. But then again, we have better technology today, too.
Right, DNA analysis, facial recognition. It's harder to get away with things now.
True. But then there's also the dark web and all of that, so it's hard to say for sure.
A constant battle, those who want to exploit the system versus those who are trying to protect it.
Belle Gunness reminds us that evil exists in every time period. It's up to us to learn from the past, look for those red flags, and change with the times, as technology changes.
Yeah.
So we come to the end of our deep dive into the life and crimes of Belle Gunness. And really, we have more questions than answers.
Yeah.
Did she die in that fire? Did she get away? We'll probably never know for sure.
But we can learn from her, and that's important.
Her story is a reminder that things aren't always what they seem.
Right. And that evil can wear many masks.
It's a tale of betrayal, greed, and really how dark humans can be.
Even in a world where everything feels transparent, there are still those dark corners. Places where secrets can hide and evil can flourish.
That's it for our deep dive on Belle Gunness. We hope you found it interesting and informative, and maybe even a little bit creepy.
Always a good thing.
Keep those critical thinking skills sharp. We'll see you next time on the deep dive. She was like a blueprint almost for like today's con artists,
Oh, yeah. Using tricks and lies to get what she wanted.
And making people feel safe so they wouldn't see it coming.
Exactly. And think about it. Today, with the internet and everything, she would have had like a million more people to choose from.
Right.
It'd be easier to hide, than it was back then.
Like no one would even know her real name.
Yeah, she could be anyone she wanted online.
Okay, so imagine she sets up a profile on a dating app.
Okay.
She's got this fake persona.
Right.
And she's targeting, exactly the type of person she wants.
Oh, that's scary. Like, it's so easy to pretend online. Anyone could fall for it.
And she was already so good at it even back then, without all the tools we have now.
It makes you wonder, could someone like her, with all her, cunning and ruthlessness, could she actually, thrive today?
Right, like would they get caught faster now?
Yeah.
I mean, forensics is so much better than back then.
Yeah, that's true. And there's cameras everywhere.
But then there's also like the dark web.
Oh, yeah.
And cryptocurrency. It's hard to track.
It's like for every new way we find to protect ourselves, they find new ways to get around it.
It's a game almost, right?
Yeah.
Between people like her and then the people trying to stop them.
A never-ending game. Yeah.
And Belle Gunness, she shows us, that there's always going to be darkness, no matter what time period. It's up to us to, learn from the past, right?
Yeah.
See the signs.
Yeah.
Keep up with the changes, as technology evolves.
Stay ahead of the game.
So we're wrapping up our deep dive on Belle Gunness. And, there are so many questions that we'll never have the answers to.
I know, it's frustrating, right?
Did she die in that fire? Did she escape? We'll never know for sure.
But her story, it's a good reminder, though, I think, to not take things at face value.
Yeah.
You never really know what's going on beneath the surface.
It just goes to show you, how dark people can be.
And that evil can look like anyone.
So that's it for our deep dive on Belle Gunness, the Lady Bluebeard, the Black Widow of Laporte.
So many names.
She really made her mark on history.
She did.
Thanks for joining us. And until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep those critical thinking skills sharp. We'll see you on the next deep dive.